All right, guys, you have made it to the next to last week of the semester, and I just wanted to take a minute or two to go over our very last lecture unit, which is going to be lecture test 7. And this one's going to have a couple of differences that we've not seen before. I've noticed that Moodle has made some adjustments. I'm not sure that I'm a huge fan of those just yet, but you should be able to find lecture 7 over here on the left now. And so the first and most important thing is going to be the due date, which is going to be Monday, May 11th. And so we have a full week to get this material completed. And there are, like I said, a couple of differences to this test. So all work and your test is due by Monday, May 11th. Now, you may want to try to do this earlier on the test. And the reason I'm saying that is because your final is due Wednesday on the 13th. So if you wait till the very last minute to take your Lecture 7 test, you're not really giving yourself a lot of opportunity to study for the final. And I'm going to talk about that in this video a little bit as well, just to kind of give you an overview of that very last test. So the first thing I want to cover is the things to know. As always, you have a list of objectives. Now, this particular test is over 2 chapters. We have Chapter 13 and Chapter 15. And remember, we did Chapter 12, which was the overview of the nervous system as a whole. And then technically 13, 14, 15, and 16 are all nervous system chapters. I believe one of them focuses on the somatic nervous system, which kind of is what controls the muscle cells. And so we covered that a little bit when we did our muscle chapter. And then another one of those chapters, I think, focuses on senses. So we just don't have time to get them all in before we finish up A&P 1. So your very last test is going to be over chapters 13 and 15. Now, in your notes are divided in that you have part 1 and part 2 for chapter 13, and then you have 1 chapter 15. So for note purposes, you have 3 PowerPoints and 3 sets of notes. But here's where I want to talk about some of the differences. Okay, now first of all, your word bits over here. You do need to know the word bits for all 4 chapters, even though we're only covering chapter 13 and 15. But there's 2 kind of differences to this test. And number 1 is that there are no essays. Okay, so we do not have any essays at all. Okay, we can just X those out. Now, should you know the information? Absolutely, because these essays are material that you will find up here in chapter 13 and 15. However, you're not going to have any essays that you have to write on this lecture test 7. Now, the next thing that I want to mention, and I have it on your test like assignment, is that you do get to use a note card for this test. You do have 2 chapters. You have a lot of very specific information to learn. You're going to be covering things like parts of the brain and their function. There's a heavy focus on the central nervous system in chapter 13. But then you're also going to be learning your cranial nerves and your spinal nerves. And those are going to be the main nerves that come off in the peripheral nervous system. And so you do have a lot of specific information. In fact, you have a lot of homework assignments revolving around those cranial nerves, because it's something that you will definitely probably see as you move forward into A&P 2 and even into nursing school or other programs. So while you get to use a note card, it doesn't mean you don't need to study. So when we say note card, what I mean by that is one of just the little small note cards. I think it's a 3x5, just your standard, not one of the big extra jumbo ones, but just a regular standard note card. You may write front and back. The main thing is it has to be handwritten. You can't type anything and paste it on there. So you can put anything that you want on that note card for chapters 13 and 15. Now, do not think that you can fit everything on there. It's not going to be possible. So that does mean you need to study. And I just want to caution you, because sometimes when people have help like that, they won't study, and you'll actually end up doing worse on this test. So what I would do is I would study like you have for your other tests, and then write down any of those things that you're just having difficulty remembering. If there are certain things that just aren't sticking, you might want to put those on there. So for this test, lecture test 7, which is due by Monday the 11th, you can use a 3x5 note card, handwritten, front and back. They are going to ask you to turn that note card in, but you can put anything that you want on there to help you. Okay, so there's no essay, and you get to use a note card. And this is going to be our last regular lecture test. So there is something I wanted to show you in your packet. This goes along with chapter 15, so it may be a little while before you get to this. But in your packet, you actually have a picture that looks like this. I'm not sure of the page number, you can find it. But I did want to point out that for chapter 15, this one picture right here has a lot of very valuable information. Because when we talk about the somatic nervous system versus the autonomic, one of the differences are going to be the number of neurons that you will find between the nervous system and the effector. You also see differerences in what your effectors are going to be. And then we also see in chapter 15, you're going to learn about cholinergic and adrenergic neurons and cholinergic and adrenergic receptors. And then you're going to learn about specific neurotransmitters that are released. And you're going to learn all about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. So you may not realize it, but as you go through that set of notes, this one picture is going to cover a lot of valuable information. So you can see that in the somatic nervous system, from the nervous system to the effector, there's only one neuron here. And this is kind of like what we learned about in the muscles. We learned that the motor neuron released acetylcholine, which means that this would be a cholinergic neuron. And then acetylcholine is going to bind to a nicotinic receptor, which is a cholinergic receptor. And this is essentially one of those ligand-gated ion channels that allowed sodium to move in. And so this N represents nicotinic, which is a type of cholinergic receptor. And then this ACH represents acetylcholine. So in your somatic nervous system, we had one motor neuron. It released acetylcholine, which binds to a nicotinic receptor. Now in the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, which this is your autonomic nervous system, you can see that there's two neurons. We have the preganglionic and the postganglionic. The preganglionic and the postganglionic, they meet up in a ganglia. And in the sympathetic nervous system, they meet up in what's called a chain ganglia. And in the parasympathetic, they meet up in what's called a terminal ganglia. And so you can notice the length of these neurons here. In the sympathetic, the preganglionic is short. It meets up in a chain ganglia close to the spinal cord. And then you have a longer postganglionic that goes all the way to the effector. And the effector for your autonomic is going to be smooth muscle and glands. And then it could also be cardiac muscle. And then in parasympathetic, you can see that we have a longer preganglionic neuron. It's going to meet up in what's called a terminal ganglia, which is close to the effector, and then it's going to have a shorter postganglionic. And then if you look at the neurotransmitters, both of your preganglionic release acetylcholine, which means they're cholinergic. They both bind to nicotinic receptors, which means they're going to be ligand-gated ion channels, which means sodium's going to go in. And then in your postganglionic, we can see that there's a difference here. Your postganglionic parasympathetic is going to be your acetylcholine, and that's going to bind to a muscarinic receptor, which could be excitatory or inhibitory. It depends on the organ. And then your postganglionic is going to release NE, which stands for norepinephrine. And so we could technically kind of interchange epinephrine, norepinephrine, which is the same as adrenaline and noradrenaline. And this is where you get the term adrenergic. And you can see that this is the only place where we see the adrenaline, noradrenaline, epinephrine, norepinephrine. And so this one's only going to be involved in the sympathetic, which is your fight or flight. And those are going to bind to either alpha or beta receptors. So once you go through these notes, hopefully this will make more sense to you, but I just wanted to show you that there is a tremendous amount of information in this one little picture. And so if you were going to make a note card, this might be something small and simple that you could draw to help you understand chapter 15. It's not everything. You do need to know that sympathetic is fight or flight, parasympathetic is rest and digest, and the effects that that's going to have on different organs. But the main thing is you do have a great summary in this one slide. So I think that's just about everything for lecture test 7. I would like to talk for a second about your final. Okay, we have a couple other important announcements that are going on right now. Your final is due by next Wednesday on the 13th, and you do have some very good information to help you with your final. Okay, and I'm going to make another video to go over that, but on your final exam, you have some review materials in your packet. You have some activities that you can do to help you practice those and check your answers. And you do have some practice assignments that you can do for your final. I am going to be offering an in-person opportunity if you'd rather take your final in person than in the testing center, and I will include that on the video. So I'm going to open this up today, and so your final unit will be available. This date will say the 13th once I've edited it. And then the last thing that I want to cover is the bonus. Okay, so remember that you do have a bonus opportunity. It is due by this Thursday, May 7th. As long as the building is open, you can come in and you can put your poster outside my office door. I'm in Office 31. If I'm here, please come on in and say hello. If not, you can just put it outside my door if I'm in class. But if you want to get a possible 20-point bonus, you do need to complete your poster and have it turned in by Thursday. And then next Monday and Tuesday, we will have a gallery walk. It'll be in the anatomy lecture room, and you're going to be able to go in there at any time that the building is open, and pretty much you have to look at 10 posters and write down one thing you learned from each. And so this will be available next Monday and Tuesday on the 11th and 12th, and you can get an additional 5 points by doing that. So if you have lab already, I would encourage you to stop by that room and do the gallery walk. So you can get 20 points by completing a poster and doing it correctly, and you can get 5 points by doing the gallery walk. So your poster is due by Thursday, and the gallery walk is next Monday and Tuesday. And then we do have one other bonus opportunity in that your TC surveys came out today. You should be getting an email from TC Survey Administrator. If you complete your survey for my class, and I can see that you've done it, as long as you complete it by next Wednesday, the day that the final is due, I will add an additional 5 points to your final exam. So they are anonymous. I don't know who wrote what if you leave any comments, but if you would complete that survey by Wednesday, I will add 5 points to your final exam grade. Okay, so you definitely have some points available here. I want you guys to finish strong. So lecture test 7 is due by Monday the 11th, and our final is due by Wednesday the 13th. And so you're going to have some Moodle activities and materials available to you to help you be successful on both. And as always, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out, come by and see me, email me, whatever it is that you need. I want you guys to finish strong and complete AMP1 with a successful grade. All right, guys, I hope you guys have a good week, and I'll talk to you later.